All right, so I'm going to cover the skeletal system, the bone structure and function. I'm also including the notes on Summit, so I'll copy these and go ahead and put them up there for you so you can follow along. But the first thing we're going to talk about is the function of bone. So of course you want to remember that it's for mineral storage, so we're storing calcium and phosphate ions in there, along with body movement. Of course, our muscles are going to attach to that to go ahead and create levers. And then hemopoiesis, that's going to be that blood reproduction in the red bone marrow. And then, of course, protection. So like our rib cage and those kind of things that are protecting our organs. Bone, fascinatingly enough, is highly vascularized. It has lots of blood vessels and lots of sensory nerves, so a lot of times we think blood is dead, but it's not. It's got lots of things going on in it. And so within that, of course, we're going to find that red blood cells are being produced within the red marrow. So if you have something like anemia, sometimes what can happen is the yellow bone marrow that we find in the medullary cavity can go ahead and revert to a red bone marrow so that you are capable of producing more red blood cells to help with that anemia. Along with that, red marrow is particularly prevalent in the os coxa, so that's just our coccyx, not our coccyx, but the coxa, so the pelvis. And so that's where you're going to go ahead and find if someone needs to have a red bone marrow transplant, they're going to test their bone marrow within the coxa. So just really quickly, we'll take a look at a long bone. So you'll see this in the upload, and I just want you to note that there are two ends, so we have a distal and a proximal epiphysis. So of course the distal one is going to be farther away from the trunk and the proximal is going to be closer to it. The shaft of the long bone is going to be called the diaphysis, and then of course we're going to find the medullary cavity there with the yellow marrow, which is going to be storing adipose tissue along with lymphocytes. And then we're going to have three layers that are going to make up the diaphysis. So we're going to have the endosteum, which is the inner layer, the medisteum, and then the periosteum. So the periosteum is a pretty interesting layer that covers the outside of the bone except for the articulations. So at the very ends of bone, you're not going to find the periosteum. But it's full of nerves, and it's a fibrous outer layer. There's two layers that make up the periosteum. They're going to be the outer fibrous and the intercellular membrane. So in the periosteum, we're going to find stem cells that are present in there, which is important for appositional growth. So that's going to be girth versus length. Along with, we're finding that it's anchored by collagen fibers, and we call those perforating collagen fibers. And it's going to cover the entire bone, like I said, except for those articular surfaces. So remember that, of course, the shaft is going to be made out of compact or cortical bone, and then we're going to find the spongy bone is going to be towards the ends at the epiphyses. Some cells of the bone. So the ones that we always like to get mixed up, osteoclast and osteoblast. So again, I have another little picture for us here of an osteoclast that you can see. It has multiple nuclei, and it also has a ruffled border. So remember that the clast is standing for that it's actually going to go ahead and clash or break down the bone matrix that we find in the bone. It's using hydrochloric acid and enzymes to go ahead and break down that matrix. One of the important pieces that it plays is to help add calcium back into the bloodstream. So if our blood calcium levels get too low, then we're going to find that the osteoclasts are going to break down the bone matrix so that it's releasing calcium into the bloodstream. What's in charge of actually causing that to happen is going to be our parathyroid hormone, and it's produced when the calcium levels are too low. So parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate osteoclasts to go ahead and break down the matrix of the bone. It also is stimulating the kidneys to produce calcitriol, as well as decreasing the excretion of calcium. So there's a couple different things that parathyroid hormone are going to set into motion to increase the calcium levels inside of our blood. Calcitriol is important because it increases the absorption of calcium in the small intestine. So when we're drinking milk, if our blood calcium levels are too low, that calcitriol is going to help with the absorption of it in our small intestine. On the opposite side of that, if we have too much blood calcium, it's too high, our levels are too high, we're going to find that we have calcitonin. So that's different than the calcitriol and the parathyroid hormone. And it's actually going to go ahead and inhibit the osteoclast so that they're not breaking down the bone matrix anymore. Okay. Next one is our osteoblasts. So again, they have a blast making bone matrix and then turning into an osteocyte or a bone cell. So we find that the osteoblast is responsible for forming the bone matrix all around until it's completely circled in, and then we call it an osteocyte. So of course it's within a hardened matrix, so it's kind of like a pit, and you'll remember that that's called a lacuna. So within the osteon, which we find in compact bone, we're going to find these concentric circles, and we call those the concentric lamellae. So you can see kind of my picture here with the osteon there, and you'll see the osteonic canal there that's in the middle with the blood vessels and the nerve vessels. And so each of those circles, we call those concentric lamellae, and then the little guys in between that are connecting the lacunae are going to be called the canaliculi. So kind of think of that as the canals between them and how they are able to transport information and nutrients and waste back and forth between them. So that's going to be within our compact bone. Spongy bone, on the other hand, is not composed of osteons, so it doesn't have those tubular, circular pieces, the osteons that we find in compact bone. Rather, it has spaces in between where we're going to find red bone marrow, and it's also going to have kind of these horn-like structures. It reminds me of like antlers that we call trabeculae. So osteocytes and chondrocytes, those are going to be making up bones and cartilage, and they're both found in lacunae, so they've got those little pits that they're hanging out in. But for chondrocytes, they're going to be found in a matrix, in a pit that has a matrix with a higher percentage of water than, of course, in bones, because bones are going to be that solid matrix and cartilage is going to be more of that semi-solid matrix. So bone matrix is interesting in that it's made up of collagen fibers, which are specifically synthesized from vitamin C. So that's why we have to have vitamin C, is to actually help with our collagen fibers, which we're going to find in our skin and then in our bone and lots of other places like our tendons and our ligaments. And that actually increases the bone's flexibility. So that's important just for when we're jumping up and down, or if we get hit by something, our bones have some flexibility so that they don't just break immediately. Included in that, we have inorganic salts. So a lack of vitamin D within those inorganic salts is actually going to cause rickets. And so that's where you're going to find that bone matrix kind of starting to break apart. And it also helps with resisting compression. So inorganic salts are going to harden up the bone matrix so that we don't immediately just like crush if we have pressure on our bones. The osteoid, or the bone matrix, is the organic part of the bone, and that's for tensile strength. So the bone matrix is important, like we said before, storing calcium and phosphate, and then also lipids within the medullary cavity. Okay, last two parts are going to be over cartilage growth and bone growth. So there's two different types of growth. We can have appositional growth, which is going to be in girth, and then your interstitial growth is going to be in length. So appositional growth for cartilage, we're always going to go ahead and find stuff starting with stem cells. And those stem cells are going to then differentiate, and they're going to start creating a matrix around them, and that's for both cartilage and in our bone. And then once that blast has created the matrix around it, it's going to go ahead and become a site. And that's pretty much the basis of appositional growth for both cartilage and bone. The other thing that you want to note for bone growth, though, in particular, is that there are two different types of bone growth. There's intramembranous ossification, which is going to occur in flat bones, and it starts in mesenchymal stem cells. And then endochondral ossification is going to occur in long bones, and it particularly starts with a cartilage model, which is then turned into bone, or it's ossified. After the cartilage model, stem cells are turned into bone cells. So you can take a look through the notes that I've posted on for that, because there's a couple different steps there that you just want to pay attention to. All right, good luck.